Jordan Banks had always been the kind of girl who kept her head down and her focus sharp. At 17, she was a model student, meticulously managing her time between advanced classes and her job at the local public library. With ambitions as high as the numerous accolades piled on her desk, she dreamt of attending a prestigious law school and championing justice. Her life was a carefully drafted plan, one with clear steps, no distractions, and no room for drama. But amidst the humming, chaotic backdrop of Melrose High, where laughter echoed through the hallways and petty rivalries brewed, Jordan's commitment to her studies often made her an outsider. She was determined, driven, and intelligent, yet surrounded by peers who seemed more interested in gossip and social media than academics. While they busied themselves with the trivialities of teenage life, she busied herself with her future, a future that looked ever brighter, marked by early acceptance letters from universities that many could only dream of. Life had its own rhythm for Jordan. She cared little for the noise of high school politics or the fleeting fame that accompanied football games and prom nights. Yet, that Wednesday morning, the course of her life shifted dramatically, leaving her reeling when she encountered something far more insidious than the occasional locker slam or eye roll. It began benignly enough as she navigated the crowded hallways, her binder pressed tightly against her chest, head down, as she moved swiftly from class to class. The cafeteria doors flung open, revealing Officer Bradley Keene, the town cop assigned to Melrose High, standing just inside. He was a heavy-set man with an air of authority that permeated the atmosphere. With students laughing around him, he commanded attention. Jordan had long adopted an unspoken rule of avoidance when it came to Officer Keene. His position, meant to protect, had often felt more like a threat than a safeguard. Over the past few months, his encounters with her had transformed from casual interactions into something more troubling, a looming specter that stalked her thoughts both in and out of school. As she passed him, she felt the atmosphere shift. "You watching where you're going, young lady?" he bellowed, an aggressive edge punctuating his words. Startled, Jordan paused, her heart racing. His hand bumped hers before she fully registered his intentions, sending a cold splash of water from his bottle drenching her shirt. Laughter erupted around her, that cruel sound rising like a tide, sweeping away her dignity in an instant. The humiliation was palpable, gnawing at her as her cheeks flushed crimson. But she didn't react. She simply gathered her papers and walked away, frustration boiling beneath the surface. In that moment, every calculated plan, every dream about a bright future seemed to shatter. This was no longer just a nightmare, it was personal. And as she retreated, Jordan realized that this was not merely about one offense, but about a pattern, a whisper of hostility that had been veiled under her pursuit of knowledge and decency. Little did she know, a storm was brewing, igniting a fight for justice she never expected to face, and her journey to reclaim her voice was just beginning. Walked through the crowded hallways of Melrose High School, her binder hugged tight against her chest, her head down. At 17, she was already a force to be reckoned with, her academic prowess marked by early acceptance letters from prestigious universities resting in her inbox. She had always stayed focused, her dreams of becoming a lawyer firm in her mind. Drama and noise were distractions she had learned to avoid. The Wednesday. It all changed began like any other day. She passed the cafeteria, where Officer Bradley Keene, the town cop assigned to work security at Melrose, stood near the doors. A group of students gathered around him, laughing. Jordan always avoided making eye contact with him, but today, he stepped forward, too close for comfort. "You watching where you're going, young lady?" he called out, the flare of authority in his voice loud enough for others to hear. Confused, Jordan stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. "I'm sorry?" she managed to stutter, startled by his sudden aggression. With a smirk, he tilted his bottle of water forward, his hand bumping into hers. The bottle slipped from his grip, or maybe it didn't. Either way, the cold water splashed onto her shirt. Gasps echoed through the hallway as her world exploded into laughter. "Oops, guess someone's clumsy today," he said casually, his tone dripping with condescension. Jordan stood there, soaked and humiliated. The laughter felt like fire ants crawling under her skin, each pair of eyes boring into her with unyielding scrutiny. Her shirt clung to her skin, her hair dripped, and her cheeks burned with shame. She didn't say anything. She didn't even look back. Instead, she bent down, picked up her scattered papers, and walked away, head lowered. But in her eyes, there was more than humiliation. Confusion and fear swirled within her. She didn't cry in the bathroom, nor did she cry when she changed shirts in the nurse's office. She held it all in, as she always had. Yet something had shifted, a haunting realization that this was not the first time Officer Keene had harassed her. The first incident had been subtle, nestled in the ordinary rush of her life. It had happened on a calm evening while she was driving home from work at the library. As she approached a stop sign at the edge of town, she saw him waiting under the flickering streetlight, his patrol car parked in the shadows. He had approached her car as she paused at the stop sign and asked if she realized she had rolled it. She hadn't. "What's in the bag?" he had asked, peering through her window. She had shifted uneasily in her seat, clutching the steering wheel. "Just some books from the library," she replied, trying to sound calm. "Where are you headed in such a hurry?" His expression had been friendly enough, but there was something lurking behind it, an unsettling undertone. "I'm just going home," she said, feeling a lump form in her throat. "Is that right? You better slow down then. Can't have you causing trouble now, can we?" She had felt trapped in that moment, but thankfully, he let her go without further incident. She had told her mom about it, brushed it aside as a routine stop, but it lingered in her mind like a dark cloud. The second time he had shown up at her job, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe of the library with a smile that sent chills down her spine. He hadn't ordered anything. He just stood there, watching her. The hours had passed, each tick of the clock grating against her. Every time she glanced up, there he was, his eyes fixed on her with that predatory gaze. Unsettled, Jordan had avoided him as much as possible until he finally left. A whisper began to coil around her thoughts. Tyler Keene, Officer Keene's son, a fellow student in her year. They had shared AP history, their paths crossing only sporadically, but it had only taken one debate 2 months earlier to set the wheels of suspicion in motion. Jordan had made a solid argument about systemic inequality in class, her passion shining through. The applause that followed from their peers was exhilarating, yet she could see Tyler's face twisted in irritation. The way his jaw clenched had shown his annoyance. How could a girl like her challenge him? In the days that followed, something changed. Tyler had started staring at her more often, murmuring to friends when she walked by, whispering cryptic comments online. As the days turned into that Friday, the weight of the week settled heavily on her, and she tried to fade into the background, her spirit unwavering but weary. She walked the halls like a shadow, tight-lipped and withdrawn. Everyone had seen the incident in the hallway. Some had laughed. Most stayed silent. The air shifted when she entered a room. Pity bore down on her, and she felt exposed. During lunch, she sought refuge in the back corner of the library, pretending to study while her heart raced with anxiety. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking with every person that walked by. The librarian checked in, asking if she was okay, and Jordan nodded, forcing a smile, but her stomach twisted with emotion. That afternoon, Mr. Reynolds, her U.S. government teacher, and one of the few educators who noticed her plight, caught her after class. "Jordan," he said gently, standing in the doorframe. "Wait a second." She halted, clutching her binder like a shield. "What's up? Are you sure everything's all right?" "I'm fine," she mumbled, though the lie hung in the air. "Because I've been teaching long enough to know when a student isn't fine." His voice held a warmth that cut through her facade. "I didn't do anything," she finally whispered. "I believe you," he said softly. That affirmation was like a lifeline thrown to her in a turbulent sea. In the quiet of her home later that night, when Jordan saw her dad's boots by the front door, mud still fresh on the soles, a wave of apprehension washed over her. Colonel Elijah Banks, had returned early, and his presence had an immediate impact. As she stepped into the kitchen, her mother, Rel, looked up from the stove, flipping pancakes in the pan, but Elijah didn't need a word. He could see it in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Jordan stood there, fingers trembling over the zipper of her backpack. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, finally taking a deep breath. She narrated every incident, the stop, the library, and of course, the humiliation in the hallway. She expected her father's anger, perhaps a slammed fist, a curse word, or a demand to drive down to the school that night. But Elijah didn't react that way. He sat quietly, nodding, his face neutral as she poured out her feelings. There was no rush to judgment, just a father absorbing every detail. Then he walked into his office, closed the door, and didn't emerge for the rest of the night. What Jordan didn't know was that while the house remained still, her father didn't sleep. He surrounded himself with old files, a laptop he had never let anyone touch, and a folded manila envelope marked FIA that had collected dust for years. By sunrise, he had gathered a digital trove of information, piecing together the public record of Officer Keene. Elijah didn't rush. He observed and connected dots many would miss. Patterns emerged like a roadmap, revealing that Bradley Keene had a history, a troubling one, of biased encounters with young black students who dared to challenge or speak up. Each complaint painted a clearer picture of an officer who thrived on power and control, believing his badge gave him the right to intimidate. The following morning, as Jordan sat across from him at the breakfast table, he asked a simple question, his tone serious but gentle. "Do you trust me?" Heart pounding, Jordan nodded. "Yeah, Dad. Of course." "Good," he said, sliding a manila envelope toward her, "because this ends today." Later that afternoon, Elijah walked into Melrose High, his mere presence commanding attention. He didn't wear a uniform. He didn't need to. His military posture and keen gaze spoke volumes. When he asked to speak with Principal Denise Thornton, her eyes widened, already sensing that this was not a routine conversation. "Mr. Banks, how can I help you?" she asked, an edge of nervousness creeping into her voice. Elijah laid the documents out like evidence. Complaint after complaint, anecdote after anecdote, detailing the pattern of behavior exhibited by Officer Keene. With each paper placed on her desk, the gravity of the situation intensified. "This is what my daughter has been experiencing," he stated calmly. "I want to know if you intend to handle this internally, or if I need to escalate the matter." Principal Thornton flipped through the pages, her face paling as she grasped the gravity of Elijah's claims. "I'll need to investigate," she said, her voice shaky. "Good," he replied, his tone swift yet low. He wasn't here for theatrics. He was here for accountability. He had already scheduled the next meeting with a civil rights attorney in Little Rock and a journalist who had covered police misconduct extensively. Word began to spread, and those who had laughed about Jordan's humiliation in the hallway went silent. The momentum she needed began to build. This was not about revenge, but about justice, an opportunity to hold someone accountable for actions that should never have taken place. On Monday morning, the atmosphere at Melrose High had shifted. Before first period even began, Officer Bradley Keene was called into a private meeting with Principal Thornton and a district representative. He walked in with a smirk, but what greeted him upon his exit was a different story altogether. His badge lay on the table behind him, suspension pending investigation, a consequence he never expected. By noon, local news outlets had picked up the story. Jordan's experience was now laid bare for all to see, detailing Officer Keene's history. Dashcam footage, public complaints, and testimonials from past students filled the airwaves, and the narrative took shape. Students whispered in the hallways. Conversations shifted from gossip about Jordan's humiliation to discussions about how this had become a pattern of abuse. Jordan didn't gloat, nor did she bask in the spotlight. She walked through the hallways with her shoulders back and head high, but a quiet confidence had replaced her earlier silence. Though her name was now linked to something larger than herself, she remained resolute. She was driven and committed. The story quickly went viral, and that afternoon, news agencies donning her face filled the airwaves. Her experience was now juxtaposed against larger stories of police misconduct across the country. Tyler Keene tried to lay low, deleting his online comments, avoiding the gaze of those who had once laughed at his jibes. The basketball player who had joined in the laughter wouldn't make eye contact. It was then that other students began to come forward. 2 black boys and a girl who said Officer Keene had stopped them without cause and intimidated them, making them feel unsafe. The solidarity of their voices formed a collective that turned whispers into a chorus. Elijah had given one interview, casual yet powerful. When the reporter asked why he didn't push harder for harsher consequences for Officer Keene, he simply said, "Sometimes the truth is the loudest thing in the room. I don't need to destroy a man, I just need the truth to do its job." And the truth was doing exactly that. Meetings at the school board commenced, forcing the police department to examine their training and policies. Students not only in Melrose but in neighboring towns began to feel empowered to share their stories. Jordan was invited to speak at a student leadership summit in a nearby city, where she had the opportunity to address an audience about dignity, respect, and the impact of fear when authority figures lose sight of their role. When it was her turn to speak, she delivered a speech that resonated deeply with everyone present. As she concluded, she uttered a line that had been echoed in her thoughts following the support from her father. Silence isn't always weakness, sometimes it's the moment before the truth walks into the room. That day, Jordan felt a weight lift. The transformation from victim to advocate was solidifying, both in her heart and in her spirit. But there was one final encounter awaiting her, a meeting that would strip away all the layers of media, noise, and public scrutiny, leaving only raw emotion and truth. A week later, Jordan found herself in a small room within the district office, with neutral walls and folding chairs that felt too flimsy for the gravity of the situation unfolding. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, an acoustic reminder of the tension in the air. Across from her sat Bradley Keene, stripped of his badge, his once confident demeanor replaced by a rigid, uncomfortable shuffling in his chair. He looked different from the man who had made her life a living hell, yet the remnants of who he was felt present. The mediator began the meeting, explaining the purpose and structure, then stepped back, allowing the silence to envelop the room. Jordan's heart raced as she locked eyes with Keene. "You humiliated me," she began, her voice steady, unwavering. "You targeted me because your son couldn't handle a girl being smarter than him." He shifted again, finally looking up, though his eyes avoided hers. "That wasn't my intention," he said, his voice half-hearted, lacking conviction. "You spilled water on me in front of the entire school. What was your intention?" Her words came out sharper than intended, demanding acknowledgement. He opened his mouth, but then fell silent. His regret hung heavily in the air, palpable yet unspoken. Jordan didn't need an apology. She needed him to understand the weight of his actions, how they left scars far deeper than the shame of being humiliated that day. With resolution, she stood up and thanked the mediator, feeling the release of tension coursing through her. She had brought her truth to the table, and that was what mattered most. As she exited the meeting room, she spotted Elijah waiting by the car. No suit, just the comforting strength she relied on. "How'd it feel?" he asked, with an understanding glint in his eyes. "It felt like I won without having to play their game," she said, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The corners of her father's mouth lifted slightly. "That's what real power looks like, Jordan." He wasn't wrong. Moving forward, Jordan refused to slip back into invisibility. Instead, she embraced her voice fully, channeling her energy into mentoring younger students. She joined a nonprofit justice group raising awareness about local law enforcement practices. She even began writing a monthly column for the state paper, discussing the importance of justice, equality, and using one's voice. Through this journey, she remained acutely aware of how fortunate she was. She had a father like Elijah, who had resources, connections, and the knowledge to navigate systems that could easily crush, the Jordan understood that her experience could either isolate or unite. Determined not to let it isolate her, she began to lend her voice to others who felt unheard. She became an advocate, not just for herself, but for every student who didn't have the courage or opportunity to speak out. Jordan chose to speak for those who couldn't, understanding the gravity of what it meant to be silenced. Her voice became a bridge for others, a means to unite and empower. She knew it wasn't just her advocacy that mattered. It was the space she could create for others to share their truths as well. Officer Keene wasn't returned to Melrose High. His badge was suspended indefinitely, the repercussions of his actions reverberating through the town. He tried to challenge the suspension, but found the system, one he believed was indomitable, slowly shifting beneath him. Elijah had been right all along. It was not about being loud, it was about being right. Jordan was a living testament to that truth. As she walked through the hallways of Melrose, she no longer felt the weight of pity that once followed her. Instead, she felt empowered, with a newfound resilience swelling in her chest. Jordan Banks had emerged from her experience unbreakable, more determined than ever to confront injustice wherever it arose. She had found her voice, and now she was committed to ensuring it would never fall silent again. And if someone ever made her feel small for doing the right thing again, she would stand tall and remind them of the lesson she had learned. Power without integrity is mere noise, but silence, when filled with truth, has the potential to shake the very foundations of the world. Jordan would continue to fight, continue to uplift others, and continue to be the voice for those who had yet to find their own. And in doing so, she not only reclaimed her story, but shaped a narrative that paved the way for change, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of many who would follow in her footsteps.